Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb riff. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by somebody I'm glad or honored to call a friend, but somebody who is definitely a paragon of justice that we need to turn to in these times of really dark and scary everything associated with what we're in the midst of. But yet, it's time to become emboldened because of the likes of Marc Dann. And it is Friday, April 18th, approximately 11 a.m. my time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And Marc, the reason I wanted to continue with you this week and not lose momentum is because we're starting to pick up momentum and starting to build an audience, especially with people that are kind of gatekeepers to the bigger picture. And these conversations are being seen, and they're not a waste of time, and we're not spinning our wheels. In fact, I find us every day getting closer and closer to becoming this sort of intersection between what everybody's looking for, but they don't know what they're looking for. And we've been filling in those blanks for some time, and you're offering options that few are bold enough to decry, but we'll get to that in this conversation. But one of the one of the main reasons why I thought it was so important to continue with us on a solo level today, and the series is called The New Untouchables, by the way. And to give a little bit further background, if you're just discovering this podcast and some of the people that we're bringing to this, Marc Dann is a former Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. He's in private practice, but he's been fighting for consumers and fighting the good fight for justice for decades. And he's been in the trenches of the political process. In our last dialogue, which I highly encourage everyone to check out, he gave us this rich contextualization of his career path, if you will, and sort of evolution of how he's gotten into the position that he's gotten to. And I got to tell you, that's really played well, Marc, with some of the folks that have seen it so far, especially Paul Peltier, who said, my background's not nearly as interesting as Marc's. But yesterday, we spoke at length, and unfortunately, you missed it, but I want to bring you up to speed real quick as to kind of set
Yeah.
the tone for this. I had June Carbone, Bill Black, and Paul Peltier, and the tonality of what we discussed and what they just drove straight to the heart of is that the law has been completely decimated, bulldozed. The outcome of this fascistic sort of order, if you will, could lead to, among other things, because of the cuts to live aid, a proliferation of AIDS, quite frankly, in countries, for example, in Africa, that we've stemmed the tide of AIDS, since really the 90s, right, with some of that budgeting and some of the scientific, prowess that's involved with that. But among other things, and then of course, Bill and Paul literally called it genocide or impending genocide, and Bill went straight to the heart of the matter in terms of this case regarding Garcia down in the Supermax prison in El Salvador, and basically said we're coming to this intersection in this constitutional crisis where the Trump administration has really left no other pathway than to murder everyone that they had sent down to El Salvador to just cover their tracks, because it opens up even more can of worms to go through the process if they don't, adhere to the orders, from the judge and so on and so forth, and just the absolute insanity that we're in the midst of. And to hear this from people who are probably some of the premier legal experts with decades of experience, does it surprise you that they're speaking with such clarity?
No, no. I mean, imagine a world where the president of the United States, I mean, this almost sounds like a Netflix movie, is
Right.
so desperate for power that he's willing to reintroduce AIDS to Africa, to reintroduce measles to the United States, to arrest people on the streets of this country without any respect to their civil rights, to due process of law, and willing to decimate in order to consolidate his power with the oligarchs, all of the protections that have been built and existed over decades, since the Depression, all the protections that are built in for working class and middle class people in this country to make them poorer and less empowered and less able then to challenge he and his merry band of oligarchs in that very direct consolidation of power towards a despotic state. One in which, in addition, and I think there's two sides to Trump. And I think we may have focused too much on one side of it. I think there's the kleptocrat who is on one shoulder, and on the other shoulder is the despot, who by force of his sad emotional history, the people that raised him, from his dad to Roy Cohn, has this emotional need to be to destroy enemies, to consolidate his power, and to really just brook no dissent at all. Um, but he's perfectly happy to enrich himself while he does it. And David Brooks had an interesting column in the New York Times this morning, and it's not somebody who I'm always a fan of, but he's right about this. I mean, they're doing these horrendous things, like with that father and apprentice. I think he's an apprentice carpenter from Maryland, to keep our attention distracted from all the other things that are going on too. Yesterday, I mean, in my world, I mean, I'm a consumer protection lawyer focused on that. I sent out an email to my colleagues in the office and around the country, saying we're literally now the last line of defense between consumers and financial predators, certainly those that are non-banks. I think there's still some autonomy with the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, but the CFPB has provided such a great protection, and a restraint on the greed and overreach of these everybody from payday lenders to payment processors to the folks. I don't know if you saw the statistic that 60% of the people that went to went to Coachella, used Affirm to buy their tickets, meaning they
Oh,
spread
wow.
the payments out. So those folks are now completely unregulated. All these finance apps where people are using like banks. I've got this focus on these crypto ATM machines that we're bringing lawsuits around the country about. But all that's left between consumers and these predators is the consumer protection bar, and we're small, and we're under resourced, but we've got we know we have a job to do. But that's and it's not because he hates consumers or really hates the people that voted for him. Many of the people that voted for Trump will be impacted by this, but it's because it is what it takes to consolidate power and enrich himself. And so that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but I think tolerating genocide would just be another day at the office in that pursuit.
Long-winded is welcome. Are you kidding me? This is the whole point, is to be able to lend voice to somebody who understands these things and also who can compartmentalize and unpack them in a way that can also turn the tables and actually provide a remedy to this scenario, because that's exactly what you've been doing for decades. And that's exactly why we have to find a way to uplift you amongst our other colleagues in this purpose to try to turn the tables, because a lot to unpack in your response, and I want to try to address a couple of things before I set up the next question. Obviously, when you did the two sides, I was thinking of Animal House and that wonderful in that wonderful scene where he had the choice to during the aftermath of the frat party. But those who understand National Lampoon and Animal House will know what I'm referring to. But further to that. The CFPB, I think, today announced that there was, well, I should say media writ large, and somebody on my timeline had revealed that further firings were underway at the CFPB because of Trump not being in accordance with whatever orders had manifested to stop that illegal overrun of the CFPB by Trump through the executive order. And I don't want to really go into too much detail unless you feel that it's necessary to kind of.
Well, yeah, I have an update on that
Okay,
actually.
go
So
ahead. Go
Judge
ahead.
Judge Berman Jackson just ordered the status quo to remain. So the firings are off until April 28th, when she's going to conduct a hearing.
Okay.
The Amazingly, the plaintiffs in representing the employees of the lawyers representing the employees of the CFPB got themselves into court yesterday as the firings were being done, filed a motion. Judge Berman Jackson ordered a conference on the motion today, and ordered both sides to provide declarations regarding the facts of this mass firing at the CFPB. And she has renewed and clarified her injunction, uh, ruled that it is not inconsistent with the Court of Appeals decision that prompted Russell Vogt and Mark Paletta, the legal counsel, and Trump, of course, from seizing the moment to thinking there was an interregnum before this got resolved to be able to fire all these people. And so she issued an order maintaining the status quo, which is people working. And then she set up for an evidentiary hearing. And look, we got to get these people under oath. I mean, Vogt and Pauletta are both lawyers. And they're members of the DC bar, as I am. And we just, believe it or not, I had the great pleasure this week of voting against Pam Bondi's brother, who was running for president of the DC bar. So don't think these guys, when they talk about Project 2025, they also have a Project 2026 and a Project 2027, because they've been at this, since the 60s. And so, they know what's coming for the lawyers. The lawyers are going to come for the lawyers on this. The lawyers controlled in DC the disciplinary process.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, I have to answer
yeah,
something real quick.
so
Okay, first of all,
yeah,
just to remind everybody, Vogt was literally the author of the unitary presidency within the context of the Project 2025. And again, remind me of his specific role within the cabinet.
uh, he is the budget director,
The budget
and
director.
but he's currently the director of the CFPB, also holding the
Oh,
office
oh my
of the
God.
director of the CFPB.
Okay,
Until the next, until the next kleptocrat
right.
is confirmed by the Senate.
Boy, these guys, when they talk about flood the zone, they weren't kidding, man. Boy, did they move all of
Yeah,
this stuff into position. I think that's a massive failure. And this is what we covered yesterday, too, of media, because the
yeah,
entire time that Rachel Maddow for the last 4 years has been hyper focused. And trust me, I like a lot of her work on as it relates to Trump, but missing the forest for the trees. They didn't even start talking about Project 2025 until a year in advance, and missed completely, Elon. And I could go on, but
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why I want to bring voices like yours to the fore to remind people that there's other people that understand what's actually happening in the trenches that can clarify. And I'll get to really the most prescient point about this in terms of why we need to talk about Alex Gibney's dark money and how it relates to Ohio. And I'll set that up
yeah.
in a
Sure.
moment. But you just mentioned something so incredibly important beyond the fact of this insanity that Vogt, the author of Project 2025, is going to be heading up not only the budget, OMB, Jesus, of course I knew that, but CFPB, okay, first of all, because of the chaos, CFPB cannot obviously be functional, trying to find its, footing in the context of everything that's going on with this chaos, just trying to survive first and foremost. So it's not really going to be able to do the work that it's been able to do for the last, let's call it 8 years, to what receive about $20 billion in clawbacks from, what was
Yeah,
going
actually, they've been up and running with a director for over 10 years at the
on
CFPB,
years. Yeah, yeah,
and
right,
and they've done incredible work. And the most important work they've done has been the deterrence of
right,
the payday lenders and the payment processors, like PayPal, Elon Musk company, or X, which wants to be a payment processor, another Elon Musk company, and or Coinbase, or all these other folks that
right.
are operating as banks in this strange new world we live in. And they've been incredible. So the enforcement actions they bring are only the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's the prevention of fuckery by these
Right.
folks that is the most important thing. And if that deterrent is gone, then watch Wall Street go nuts funding these fintech companies, which will ultimately take the last dollar of every person who earns 15 or $20 an hour in America.
Right. They're just set up to be not, oh my gosh. So yeah, again, this is so electric because again, to remind myself of where we are in this conversation. I mean, first and foremost, you made the point that 60% of the attendees at Coachella, again, I keep asking myself, how are people affording all of these things? Okay, well, that certainly made sense based on what you're talking about. Here's another point that I've always been, reverting in the back of my mind because I know this to be true because of other conversations I've had with the great Art Wilmarth and some other things that literally Elon and the entirety of the PayPal mafia, 2 decades later, really are in a position to become central bank digital currency. It's always been a lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate scenario while they maneuver into what you're talking about. Not to mention X has all of this information on millions, if not billions of people worldwide. They can parlay that. They know this digital media and this algorithmic, scenario, not to mention the distraction, of course, even though, with Garcia, it's a massive scenario. And by the way, I just want to make this comment. I didn't learn until yesterday, and I learned it from an online podcaster, a guy who goes by the name of Legal Eagle, who I think is a really sharp attorney. And he did some deconstruction of what was happening in that particular case that I haven't heard in mainstream media. And I'm going to bring this full circle to the point that I've been really wanting to make since you just brought this up a moment ago.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, this guy, Garcia, apparently was escaping MS-13. His father was a member of the police in El Salvador, in the midst of all this corruption, couldn't fight it, found a way to get his children out of the United States. I think he had a brother, potentially. I can't remember the specifics, but he specifically was escaping MS-13. Or it was actually another group.
A different gang, but same idea. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It was a different gang. But he gets in the building guild. He, goes through all of the processes of being here illegally and that sort of thing. And then he gets picked up in this broad sweep, which we now can see is completely illegal. It's a version of fascism. But you have the AG, Pam Bondi, declaring that all of these are propaganda. There's no evidence that we've seen so far of him being a member of MS-13. Obviously, that's the whole thing of habeas corpus and due process, etc. But here is Pam Bondi, and you mentioned her brother. I just want to say for the audience, and see if you can comment on this for a moment, because I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Okay, so in our work in the con, I've spent a lot of time with Richard Bowen. Richard Bowen was the whistleblower from Citibank, Citigroup, who had revealed everything behind the scenes that led to then Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin, who came out of Goldman Sachs, who became chairman of Citi. They were in this monumental scenario with the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, where all of this information was being laid out to create criminal referrals. Now, there were 11 criminal referrals that were evolved from Dick Bowen's testimony, but there was a lot of maneuverings behind the scene where the SEC didn't follow through, where the FCIC didn't follow through, given all of the emails and the contextual evidence that he had that he was warning based on Sarbanes-Oxley, what is that specific legal term within Sarbanes-Oxley in terms of the protocols of what the CEOs and the board of directors had to sign off on to make things obviously fluid for the company, the legal.
Right, but they had to personally, under oath, verify the financials of the company.
That's right.
And putting them at risk. No, not in this America, but in some America, putting them at risk of criminal prosecution.
Well, that's right, but that was the whole intent of Sarbanes-Oxley, right? And then, of course,
right.
There's another term that will come to me in just a minute, but
so do the accountants. I mean, so that's what right. Let's put these guys, do it. Let's do it when oath meant something, when truth meant something. I mean, hopefully it still does.
Well, so it was the protocols of their business model that would undergird the securities that they were using through their, the entirety of the process, because they were selling literally $80 billion of fraud per year. But as this whole cover-up started to manifest, the guy that was leading the investigation for the FCIC, Pam Bondi's brother.
Yeah.
So all of this stuff went away, right? And guess where Pam Bondi's brother ended up as a partner?
Yeah.
The firm that was representing Citigroup.
I'm sure. I mean, yes, just like all the rest of them. I mean, that's Democrats and Republicans. I don't know if you saw, there was a study, and I put it on Blue Sky. I didn't have a chance to send it to you. Um, Actually, the fewest prosecutions, corporate prosecutions, took place in the last year of the Biden administration. There were less than 60 prosecutions corporate executives, down from Bill, from Bill's time of thousands
Right.
of prosecutions of corporate executives. Um, Democrats, and I had this thought, Patrick, because I think I've convinced you to become a bit of a Cleveland Browns fan. Um, the, the Democratic Party is the Cleveland Browns of politics and government. They
Totally
literally
see it.
can't make a good
Yes.
decision. They can't. They can take all this talent and waste it for years and decades, and always make the wrong move. You can be counted on to make the wrong move at any given time. I mean, I'm as angry with the Democratic Party. I actually was at a event last night honoring one of our mayors of a small town here, a suburb of Cleveland, who as a mayor of a town of a few hundred people, created parental leave for gender without gender, created a 4-day work week for his workers and made it work both for the community and for the workers. Put into practice the words, put into practice the Democrats are great about talking about values and what we should be doing, but this guy was doing it, and it was remarkable because it's so rare. You don't see a single Democratic office holder doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, and let's start with whoever the prosecutor is in Prince George's County, Maryland. Um, what what about that abduction of that young man is not kidnapping?
Exactly.
It and we're actually road testing some legal research AI in the office, and so as part of that, I actually I asked the Lexus AI, can a government official acting, who arrests somebody knowing that they don't have a basis to arrest them, and removes them from the country, be charged with kidnapping? And the answer is yes. So AI says it's right. It must be true, right? So, but I mean, and I sent that to all my friends in Maryland. I said, please send this to your prosecutors. I mean, where are the Democratic elected officials who are in a position to stop this bullshit?
And by the way,
They
and
should act.
by the
Yeah,
way, I love what you just said here, and I'm going to let you finish that. But I got to just remind people, this is what Paul said yesterday. Exactly. This is how in tune you guys are all right now. The new Untouchables. Paul's like, it's all bullshit. He went straight to the heart of the matter. Then he laid out why it's bullshit. But please continue. You guys are both speaking just like Jennifer Todd, as directly to the American people as I've ever heard. Because now
right, right.
all bets are off. Please continue.
Right. So if you live in a city or a democratic state, you should be demanding that your office holders drop literally everything they're doing and put all their efforts into fighting this onset of an autocratic state. That the attack on people's civil liberties, the attack on their wallets, the coming transfer of wealth from the poorest among us to the richest among us. And I don't care if you're the auditor, or the county prosecutor, or the county commissioner. Counties should be filing lawsuits. Mayors who are losing housing funds under HUD, that have been just where they're impounding funds without due process of law, without cause, in direct violation of the a direct violation of the direct mandate of Congress. Um, those lawsuits have to get filed, and the courts are going to be busy. I'm a little worried my cases won't get heard, and that's, bad luck for me. But I mean, we need to flood the zone. We need to. Well, we actually what we need is an aggressive zone defense
Exactly.
that attack, that makes sure that everybody coming into the zone gets covered, even if that means I have to hand off Pan Bondi to the next guy.
That's right.
to make sure
That's right.
that she when she's moving left that we and when whoever's coming from my left will be the one that I'll cover.
That's right. And we got to know where we are on the field, and we got to be able to call some blitz packages in here because that's where you
Yeah,
guys come in. Because I want to remind the
yeah.
viewers again, we're talking to the former Attorney General of the Attorney General of this great state of Ohio. And we're going to parlay that. Did you have one more comment before I move on to the next?
No, 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 no. I appreciate the promotion though.
No,
But yeah,
but
no.
but 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 no, but no, again, we're going to
Mm,
amplify, and I'm telling you, I've got momentum. I've got momentum in a lot of ways that we haven't had before, and you've seen me spinning my wheels trying to
yep.
get this
Oh,
message out for
I know.
years now. But suddenly, it's starting to come together because we saw 10 million people come to the streets 2 weeks ago on April 5th through the 50501 hands off, and
Yeah.
today, by the way, is the
Mhm,
250th anniversary of the Paul Revere ride. And so there's this
mhm,
burgeoning like we have got to come together and finally break out of our silos. But what they're all
mhm,
missing, and this is what was one of the subjects of our discussion yesterday with the rest of the new Untouchables, is they don't understand the law. They don't understand the fraud that's been going on forever, the criminality that's led to the corruption, even though all the signs on these millions of signs around the country are begging for these answers that we're about to provide, and we have been throughout. So I just want to use that as kind of a marker and a gauge because
yep.
we come back to Pam Bondi. But first and foremost, so yesterday, I watched for the first time, or 2 days ago, I watched for the first time a brand new documentary series that was released on HBO by a filmmaker that we have some ties to, that just happened to tie to you, which there's all this like some
Mm,
this
mm,
Venn diagram stuff about how all this works. But he has a
yep.
new series. His name is Alex Gibney, a prolific documentarian, been at this for well over 15, 20 years with great films about Enron and the former Elliot Spitzer and many other guys, Jack Abramoff. I mean, this guy's known corruption long before 2008. The things slightly changed, but now he's back in, and he's worked with one of our colleagues, Paul Peltier, on several different occasions that also incorporate things that you've been in the midst of, including Purdue Pharma. But I'm setting this
Mhm,
up from this perspective because the series is called Dark Money. And the
mhm,
first episode of this two-part series, that really the intent of it is to expose the engineering of dark money and how it influences our politics. And his first episode is called Ohio Confidential. Now, this deals with the first energy corruption, which has been deemed within this documentary as the largest state corruption case in Ohio's history that I know you were in the midst of. You were trying to get my attention on this for some time. I was tracking on it, but I was tracking on it in a very significant way towards the latter part of this. Of course, before I saw Mr. Gibney's series on this. But of course, I just kind of want to introduce just a couple of concepts for you to talk about, or at least to address. But a couple of the names that came out of this documentary that were really amazing. It was built as a murder mystery first and foremost, kind of in one of those, so what back in the 30s, the comic books that
I,
kind of
but look, let's be honest, it was a bad imitation of the con.
ah. Oh my God, it was a direct lift stylistically, but that is amazing that you said that. And that's straight to my heart. But look, they were Neil Clark was an amazing character in this, of course, being a lobbyist, and it was
Who I've known for 40 years. I knew for 40 years before he died. Yeah.
my God, and I can't wait to hear you do wax about what you know about this because it involved, your Speaker of the House, right, Larry Householder, and his
Mhm,
conviction for the corruption that also involved um, uh, Matt Borges. But
mhm.
before you kind of go on about your insight, I just kind of want to say this off the top. Besides your very kind and generous statement that yes, it was a lift of the con. Stylistically, it was like you could put a fourth grader in that to see ours first and then theirs second, and they'd be like, oh, it looks like how does it go? Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, right? But
Mhm.
obviously, our story was monumental. But this is a giant story that you've been in the midst of for a long time. First, can you unpack your understanding, or maybe just kind of a surface introduction of the story, and then maybe we can get more into the details.
Sure. Look, Ohio has a long. I've been around Ohio politics for 40 years, and I shared some of that the last time you and I talked, but and some of the characters that I've gotten to know. But the state house has operated exactly the same way for the 40 years that I've been around it. There is businesses through campaign contributions and now through dark money make contributions to legislators to either stop or promote legislation. And there's you can draw just like those strings and pictures. You can draw one of those strings between every bill that passes the Ohio General Assembly and has for the last 40 years, including when I was there, and the folks that have paid somebody to do it. Now, do they believe they're doing it legally sometimes? Yeah. Was there stuff that was under the table? I don't even know about that. Okay. What I know is what's happening in a reported way in campaign contributions. And that was, and that worked to some degree to deter bad behavior because that was all disclosed. And so at least they had to have the shame of delivering for their contributors. Now, as the super majorities, first the Democrats, and then now the Republican supermajority has grown, they became less sensitized to any of that because it didn't affect their, and with gerrymandering and so forth, didn't affect their likelihood of getting reelected. There was no risk. These people were operate with very little risk of losing their office. And just like any other government situation, they're, to the extent they rotate out, if they don't under term limits, if they don't go to the other house, they from the House to the Senate or the Senate to the House, then they go to work as a lobbyist on the other side of the money transactions that have gone on. What I think Gibney's documentary showed is just how dangerous that became once dark money was introduced into the mix. I mean, I could tell you that I knew when I was a member of the Senate that there were literally 30 registered lobbyists for First Energy, which is the largest public utility in the state of Ohio. It's an electric utility based in Akron, Ohio, which has tentacles well beyond the state of Ohio. But it's an Ohio homegrown company, and they were, in the same way that the car dealers protected their franchise. To which I'm now for because Musk is against that. And the Ohio wine producers kept California wine from being shipped into Ohio, and the realtors protected their monopolistic behaviors because they had a core of lobbyists, and you can see that, and we did a decent job of creating that transparency around who's lobbying for who, and that's work. So we knew what was going on. But this dark money component, it introduced this entire new level of the opportunity to bribe people without getting caught. In a way that Neil Clark in his and I recommend his memoir to anybody. I downloaded it on my Kindle from Amazon, but he really thought what they were doing with the dark money was perfectly legal, and I can see why he saw it that way because he was open all the way through. The way he talked on these recordings that the FBI did, I mean, he talked like that all the time. He talked like that in the hallways of the State House. He talked about it with me, a Democrat, because he was, he was a big ego guy and wanted to brag about all the fixes that he had put in over the years and what a big and powerful guy he was. And once he had this tool in his toolbox that was created by Citizens United, that was accelerated and I think that the second part of the series, focuses on the relationship between the religious right and the corporate and the corporate business community that has been funding all this. And I keep using this word fuckery for the last 30 years to try to get us to this point, with no intention of ever reversing Roe versus Wade, or doing any of the things that they promised those folks on the very right wing that they would do. But they sure delivered every time a Republican took office. In every state legislature, they delivered for their sponsors. So the people that paid the bill got the legislation that they wanted. Um, and that's how it's always been, and that's what this. So this just showed another day at the office. The amazing part of it is nobody thought they were doing anything wrong. I really believe that. And I know I because I think these guys are terrible people, and they're willing to to whore themselves out for money, or for campaign contributions, and I get that. But I don't think they think of themselves as people who commit crimes. But they were committing crimes, and turns out that they're going to be convicted. I mean, Householder himself was convicted, serving 20 years. Even Trump hasn't commuted that sentence yet, although I expect it any moment. Um,
True.
uh, I do, because he was just doing the bidding of the people that put Trump there.
Right.
Um, and Trump is just a sideshow. I mean, what's going on at the CFPB is what they paid their money for.
Right.
Okay, the rest of it, that Trump is just entertainment, and he is a vessel for these corporate thugs
Right.
to increase their power, their ability to make money at the expense of the environment, to make money at the expense of working class people, to make money at the expense of the health of millions of people. As we saw with the opioid crisis, and all the lobbying and that went on behind that. I mean, in a very concerted way, this has all been going on. In any event, that's what we saw there. It was, and everybody was stunned. And I think there were a lot of people that in Columbus who, right up until Householder was convicted, were sure that he was right, and that Neil Clark was right, and that all they were doing was doing what they were legally allowed to do.
Well, I agree with you, and I've been saying this for some time, that Trump is
Yeah.
just kind of the face of the transactional scenario based on all of the things that you've been in the midst of, and same with the rest of the new Untouchables for the last several decades, right? But now it's on
Right.
overdrive, and like you very eloquently, and I think on point, describe the two versions of Trump, because it always reminds me of the fascism of Hitler from this perspective. I never compare Trump to Hitler, only in so much as this, and it was also depicted in a wonderful film called Amsterdam, starring Christian Bale and Margot Robbie, and it was directed by David O. Russell, where they showed the industrialists that were playing roulette with the fascists, thinking they could
Mhm.
control the fascists, when all of a
Right.
sudden in the end it blew up in their face, which is kind of happening now. But to revert back to Householder and the actual corruption that took place to send him to 20 years, that of course most likely, because now it's got a lot of attention because
Mhm.
it's become this HBO documentary. And by the way, I've just read recently that HBO, I think, is in conversations with those from the Trump administration to potentially, like these law firms bend the knee, create
Mhm.
more content that Trump, and
Mhm.
there was this literal propaganda documentary on HBO 6 months ago. As a producer and a filmmaker, I've been in the midst of this the whole time, and this is why we're trying to branch out and go independent and get millions of people to understand what the system is not allowing us to understand. But Gibney's film was spot on in laying out the foundations, because he was working with one of the greatest investigative journalists of all time, a woman by the name of Jane Mayer, who wrote a book that I think I read as far back as 2015, 2014, Dark Money, that
Mhm.
basically unpacks all of the influence of the Koch brothers, for example, and all of their different arteries, their different functions from think tanks to universities
Mhm.
to
Right.
lobbyists and so forth. And of course, Gibney's been in the mix of that a long time, which is why we went to him with the con initially, by the
Right.
way,
Right.
and that's
Right.
a whole
Yeah.
nother story.
Right.
But reverting back to your role in this whole thing, though, because look, I wanted to say this at the outset, and I don't know why I didn't, because I should always introduce you this way. What the audience needs to understand, and everybody watching this, and please share this as far and wide as you possibly can. But Marc Dann was the former Attorney General of Ohio, and he did this incredible work that we discovered through a tragedy that became a miracle with this group of guys that were just unbelievable in terms of, and we show you this in the con at www.thecon.tv, but that led to a a RICO conviction of a mid-level player that was doing exactly what the entirety of our financial system was doing, that created the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that has now never ended. Now, the thing that's relevant about that to the First Energy case, and I do want to insert this as well, they're no
Yeah.
longer on the Cleveland Brown Stadium, name on the Cleveland
Yeah.
Brown
Right.
Stadium,
Right.
as a
Right.
result of this Huntington bankage.
Yes. Yeah.
But going back to my point, I do recall, and this wasn't something that Gibney and his producers thought was worthwhile in discussing, but your attorney general, whose name eludes me at the moment, you,
David Yost.
David Yost, did he not use your uh, precedent, if you will,
Mhm.
of what you
Mhm.
guys did as
Mhm.
part of their investigation into what ultimately would lead to these corruption charges for householder?
Well, no, actually, the federal government, the U.S. attorney was all about putting the politicians in jail. They indicted Householder and all of the lobbyists and politicians. They left alone and refused to indict the or failed to indict. We'll give them that much. The executives of First Energy who wrote the checks, who
Okay.
paid the money, who wired the money into the dark money knowingly, and had a whole there's a whole text message. It's a whole different side of this of this scandal, and somebody should make a documentary about that. But I mean. Text messages, high fiving each other as they were, as they were, nefariously influencing the creation, the passing of a bill that was going to put $1 billion into their company at
Right.
the expense of ratepayers in Ohio.
That's the whole
So,
point of the whole
right,
case.
right. Well, and so, what it probably in the only way that David Yost and I are alike. He did what I did, and which is what I'm urging others to do. And I didn't really make this connection until just this minute. When the federal government wasn't doing what it's supposed to do, I took the power I had as AG
That's right.
and convened a something called the Organized Crime Task Force,
Yep.
which allowed us to put independent, because Ohio's got a broad range of, we have hundreds, I mean hundreds, maybe over 1,000 police departments, but to put essentially a task force together to investigate a particular behavior or a phenomenon or criminal activity, and then essentially to work around the U.S. attorney and the folks that weren't indicting people. So we took those resources and we created that, and we used that tool that was at my exposure at my fingertips. We created this mortgage fraud task force, and that's what brought these guys down. Yost did the same thing when the statute of limitations was getting
That's what I
ready to
meant.
run.
Yes.
Yeah, on Chuck Jones and Dowling, the two top officials of First Energy responsible for this, and he was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I mean, he convened the same thing. He convened a task force because Ohio AGs don't have independent ability to bring criminal cases, except in the case of Medicaid fraud, only against poor people who rip off Medicaid or workers' comp. Those are the only criminal powers amazingly, that the state AG has. But but in terms of going after the people that are screwing those people, no, no such power. So they had to build. They went and built the case and presented it to the prosecutor in Summit County, Ohio, which is where First Energy, Akron, where First Energy is located, and she brought the case. She, as you know, and then appointed Yost's office special prosecutors to prosecute the case. So their office is actually prosecuting, which is the same thing we did, in the story that's described in the con. So that's exactly the kind of independent action. And Yost was frustrated that the federal government, at the time it was the Biden federal government, wasn't prosecuting these characters. I mean, but the prosecution of Householder actually started under the first Trump administration with a Republican appointed U.S. attorney who was featured in that, in Dave DeVillers, who was featured in that as well. Um, but he wouldn't go. Being a Republican, he couldn't bring himself to the next level, which is to indict the corporate criminals that were actually benefiting from all of this. Yost, to his credit, didn't, and then Biden administration didn't pick. I thought as soon as the Biden U.S. attorneys were appointed, that they would pick it up and prosecute those guys, and they didn't do it. And Yost is like, somebody's got to do this. These guys committed crimes wide out in the open. Everybody knows about, and it's embarrassing that nobody's bringing this case. So he did it. So to his credit. Now, unfortunately for him, he is about to be slaughtered by a Trump endorsed guy named Vivek Ramaswamy, who is
A
because he
fraudster in
his
his own right.
right. His whole Dave Yost's whole ambition in life was to become governor of Ohio, which is never going to happen now because of Trump, and in part because he was willing to fuck with the money people in this
Right,
particular case. Now,
right.
in very few other I mean, there have been so many other scenarios where I and like-minded people have begged him to take action around other issues, and he's been very reluctant to do that. But when it came to this, I mean, he did. And you know what? I'm not sure that isn't why they were so quick to embrace Ramaswamy when this guy's been waiting, 8 years for this opportunity. He was the
Wow.
logical next guy to be governor.
Can I insert something here that
Yeah,
I don't want to miss this because it'll
yeah,
because a conversation ends up I got
yeah,
1,000 ideas for everything you say, quite frankly. But
yeah.
so I just read last night, okay, and I read this
Mhm,
in social media on X, so it's a propaganda in some capacity, but I haven't
mhm,
seen it played out in mainstream media yet. But it was from the office of Pam Bondi, who is now apparently going after Letitia James for 20 years of mortgage fraud. Okay,
mhm, mhm.
did you see that by chance?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so let me just make this point real quick for your response. So
Mhm,
when I was watching Letitia James' civil case, with it wasn't Judge Mershon, it was the other one. But the long and short of it had our nation's attention for a short period of time. That led to the $450 million judgment against
mhm.
Trump's organization for defrauding the banks, right?
Right, right.
And what they missed in this entire scenario is what we've been revealing the entire time through Bill Black's led financial fraud called control fraud revelations that took down the savings and loan debacle, but ultimately that they've sidelined since, which has led to this insanity that we're in the midst of. And so, in the context of, Pam Bondi, who of course had done a lot of work on behalf of the AG's office to make sure a lot of people didn't understand what was going on
Mhm,
in the courts
right,
based on the 2008 great financial crisis. But when Letitia James brought these cases where there were so many parallels through falsification of business records, through all manner, shape, or form of fraud, and it was fraud on the bank. They didn't understand Deutsche Bank was in
yeah,
on it. They didn't understand how Deutsche Bank was rolling those loans into,
right,
for example,
right,
like I prefaced based on Richard Bowen earlier, based on what Pam Bondi's brother covered up, which were selling
right,
in securities globally to the tunes of billions upon billions of dollars for these giant too big to fail apparatuses. And what Letitia James did not do was, like in this First Energy corollary, go after the executives that were actually making the entire thing happen. So if we can't see that part of it, none of it else makes sense, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the RICO convictions that you guys went after, and how you were able to lay out the entire. And by the way, when you answer this
mhm,
question, would you mind
yeah.
throwing in the level of commitment that you guys had to do to build this operation from the ground up to be able to get this sort of, it almost felt like an intelligence operation to be able to reconfigure what the hell was going on in that office in Akron, Ohio, led by Tom Murphy, that led
Yeah.
to what you guys were able to do. But I hope that wasn't too much of a compounded
No,
question.
no, no. Well, I'm going to start with the last part because that's kind of fun answer. We when the cops and the lawyers in our investigation figured out we couldn't do math, we recruited people from the county auditor's office to help us read in the county treasurer's office to add to our task. So I don't think we'd ever added non-law enforcement people to task forces before, but we again we like the current government, we push the rules a little bit, but we used the expertise that we had, and I made that point to you in contrast to the immense resources that the FBI has and that the U.S. attorneys have and the Department of Justice to bring these kind of sophisticated, complicated prosecutions, which they don't do anymore. And they're literally the only enterprise that exists in America, assuming it survives the next 3.5 years. that have the capacity to do that, and I have some hope that someday they might actually do that part of their job, and to do it well. So yeah, so
State
that
AGs?
was
Is
that.
that what you mean? State
Yeah,
AGs? Okay.
yeah, no, I'm talking about USA, the federal, the U.S. Justice Department.
Okay.
Someday after Trump,
Oh,
if we survive this crisis,
which is going to have to
um,
be led by the likes of you and Bill and Paul, for
well,
example.
it's going to have to be led by people who are willing to prosecute criminals without fear or favor.
Right.
I that sounds like a cliche, or it sounds quaint, but really, that's at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. They have to be able to drink their booze, take their food, and vote against them in the morning. Like historically, people were sometimes able to do. I
Yeah,
mean,
the
look, our
Untouchables. That's why you guys are the new Untouchables, pardon
right,
the
right,
humor.
right, right. Well, so that's that, and if we're ever going to cure the country of this curse, we're going to have to kill it at the root, and the root is this corporate cabal
Yeah.
that is now has created through their puppet Trump, who possibly look. Trump is different than Hitler. Hitler was better than Trump because at least he had the principles not to use the moment to enrich himself,
Right.
and his family and his friends. He was never about that. I mean, he was just as determined to consolidate that power, and was carrying that, whatever that psychological thing is that Trump's carrying around on his left shoulder, but he didn't have the guy on his right shoulder saying, "What can we steal here?" And how can I enrich my family? How can I enrich how do I pay back these people that brought me here? And they've been just masterful at it. And that's what separates him from because frankly, the Trump model is much more cynical and much more it's much more personal. I mean, I don't think that because I don't think it matters to him. He can talk about anti-Semitism and use, which is in a way that is downright insulting to people of
Right.
my faith.
It's
Um,
perversion. Everything's
right,
perversion.
right. Everything that Judaism stands for. We are the people of the laws. We
That's
have we
right.
have the Talmud. We have the Torah. We are we are the first original community that lived by a set of laws, that were enforced not by God, but enforced by men who as part of the social contract.
Happy
Um,
Passover, and
and
that's the whole
and
point came
and
from
and
Exodus
women and
Deuteronomy.
women yeah, and more recently, and women. Not that everybody's got their issues, but at the end of the day, the fact that he is using this Jewishness and anti-Semitism as an excuse to deprive people of their constitutional rights is insulting, and in itself is anti-Semitic.
Absolutely. And we're coming to the last 4 minutes of
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
dialogue, and,
yeah,
and I'm sure you got to jump, and I got to jump. But look,
yeah.
you were getting close to that bit because I asked you such a compounded question. You couldn't.
Yeah,
I couldn't ask you
yeah.
again. Look, in your investigations, right? What you had to
Mhm,
do was you had to be breath. You had to think like intelligence. You had to think through the paradigm. You had to think through how
mhm.
all of the mechanisms work to be able to get the racketeering conviction. I mean, that's the
Right.
bottom line. And so when Letitia James did not go after the bank executives that were involved
Mhm,
with control fraud, I'm just saying it's blowing up, and it's ironic that it's Pam Bondi that's bringing and saying, within the midst of all of the other propaganda that's going on, that she's going to go after Letitia James for mortgage fraud. I don't know what's in
mhm.
Letitia James' closet, for example. I don't know if
Yeah,
she's invested, but the
yeah.
bottom line is we know what Donald Trump's been doing for decades, which has been
Right.
the same thing. So
Mortgage fraud. Right.
exactly. So
Yeah,
can you final just kind of give us a final passing thought? Because I think what
yeah.
we need the people to understand is that you are equipped to be able to handle complex scenarios on behalf of liberty and justice for all, based on integrity, that does the work for the people that obviously both parties have completely collapsed. I'm sorry.
Well, and Patrick, it's not me. There are thousands of people that I know, and thousands more in the country that I don't know, that have the absolute capacity to put these pieces together, to take those individual actions that they can take, There are thousands of office holders in local governments and hundreds of statewide office holders around the country who can use the powers that they have in their office to fight this onset of authoritarianism. But they have to do it. And look, people like me, I mean, people keep encouraging me to run for office again, it's such a horrible business anymore. I think my daughter would literally slit my throat if I ever did, because it was so hard for her, and you got to think about those things as well. But you know what? I need to put that aside. Not that I need to run for office, but I need to do what I can within my power.
Yeah.
I have a law firm. We have lawyers. We're going to represent some people that have been deported. We're going to represent. We're going to bring class action lawsuits. I've been trying to convince some of the local jurisdictions around here to bring in civil cases to try to stop what's going on. But those people have to stop. They have to come out of their house and stop hiding under the bed and stop saying politics is awful. I don't care about it, and turn off Sirius XM and Netflix and go to work, because this is Paul Revere is riding through America today, and saying, get up out of your house, turn off your streaming services, and do your patriotic duty, which is to do everything you can do in your power to fight this decimation of everything we stand for: the rule of law, due process of law, equal protection under the law, and lawyers in particular have that duty as well. And it doesn't matter if you're a bankruptcy lawyer or a personal injury lawyer. Find a way that you can get a toehold here, because as David Brooks pointed out, for the being right for the first time in a long time, that there has to be a mass. It has to be everywhere. It has to be a massive movement, and the movement can have many, many components. If your best thing to do is to go, like people here in Cleveland do, go stand outside the federal building every Wednesday. They call it Wednesday at Bernie's, trying to get Bernie Moreno to hold a town meeting and address some of these problems. Do that. If you're a lawyer and you can represent somebody who's being deported, do that. Even if you need to brush up on some stuff. If you can bring a lawsuit on behalf of a client, or represent somebody, one of those protesters that's going to get stunned by a stun gun at Marjorie Taylor Greene's,
Or
you're a
worse.
criminal lawyer.
Yep.
That's what you do. Do your patriotic duty. It's on everybody. And if we do nothing else, if we get a few people to get that message, Patrick, I think this has been, not only is it great to talk to all you guys every week, and I've really truly enjoyed it. But I would do it if it didn't matter, but it does matter.
Right.
That people understand what's going on, educate yourself, don't get your head out of the sand, and go to work.
Well, that's brilliant. And, my hope would be that you and the group of the new Untouchables become the tip of the spear, and that millions of people find us to understand that. And when we have critical mass, there's a lot we can do, especially if we have resources where it's not saturated. Because when I'll make this 1 minute because I know you got to go. But
Yeah.
Eric and I got on the road after the 2008 great financial crisis in 2011, and we surfed the Occupy Wall Street movement. We've learned about this, soup to nuts. That was prologue to what we ended up doing in the con. But one thing we found out during the Occupy Wall Street movement, and of course, Occupy led to Bernie, and then the Tea Party led to Trump and MAGA, but things can get saturated quickly. It can become so much about so many problems because it is about floating the zone. But what you said earlier in this conversation is we can handle all of that, but we also have to have the focus on the corruption. If we focus on the corruption and we able to find ways to bring those cases to jam these guys up through the professionals that know how to do this, if we can get millions of people to orient towards the new Untouchables, and quite frankly, a lot of this information that we're putting out there from the con to the Clean New Deal, that we can then become, quite frankly, and I've always, because we're both sports guys, I always use the reference of, and since you're from the great state of Ohio, I'll just say, look, it's like Ryan Day's Ohio State playing a high school team, right? unless
Yeah,
you know how the game is played and you've got depth and you've got strategy and you've got the best players on the field, there is no way in hell you can defeat the big money that's working behind the scenes, like we talked about through dark money, because they've controlled and puppeteered this thing, not just the last year, not the last 5 years, but probably the last, I don't know, 25 years on overdrive, but since 2012 because of Citizens United, and I could go on and on and on. So thank you for your time, Mark. I really appreciate
thanks,
it. I look forward
Patrick.
to the next time. Have a great weekend and
You
all the
too.
best.
Thank you. Thanks.
Goodbye.